It's cold outside. We are in the midst of a snowstorm, or getting close to being in the midst of a snowstorm.
Are we?
Well, I am. I don't know about you.
Oh.
You live a couple
Oh,
hours
interesting.
away.
I wonder if it's coming my way.
I was told earlier today that I have an Alberta Clipper on its way.
What is an Alberta Clipper?
I don't know. It makes me think like it's something from the fog or something.
Interesting. Cool.
But I don't think it's anything like a nor'easter, but it sounds bad. And they keep telling me that it's going to be
Not
like,
good.
I'm going to quadruple the amount of snow I've had for the year, which is like nothing. So I might have like an inch and a half of snow on the ground in the morning. I'm not sure. But here we are. We're going to be talking about, as Mark would like to call, a new movie. We're talking about a movie
Yeah, this is
that...
brand new. Gosh, this is like is it on Blu-ray yet?
Barely. It is barely out there. And we're talking about a movie that is almost 14 years old at this point. But this is a movie that came out in 2004. And as we have pounded into the ground several times on this show, this movie is one of those that have kind of risen from the ashes of the 90s horror dumpster that was absolutely shit. And I think for the both of us, this was probably one of the first real times out of, the 90s that we were like, whoa, horror has a chance to survive. And we're talking about 2004's Saw.
I remember when this movie first came out. How did you hear about it? Was it the TV spots, or was it a trailer, or was it what got you to hear that that there was something brewing?
I was trying to remember exactly how I heard of it when it came out, because it was in 2004. So, at that time, I was probably following a bunch of chat room kind of things for horror. So I might have heard it from there. Or I might have heard it from like Fangoria. I'm not exactly sure. I remember when I first saw it, but how I heard of it, I'm not 100% positive. But I do remember hearing oh, this movie is amazing. You have to watch this movie.
I remember very well how I heard about this film. I was working in my old job, and I used to religiously listen to the radio. And I was listening to the local Chicago shock jock, Mancow, and he had Carrie Ells on as a guest. And he was talking about this brand new movie he's in, and how horrifying it was, and how scary it was, and this and that, and just talked the crap out of it. And it really, he sold it to me. And I had no idea who Carrie Ells was until he said he was the guy from Princess Bride. And then I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. So I was really excited to see this film. And then that's the beginning for me.
I don't remember how I heard of it. I just remember hearing about it. And it could have been, too, because this was 2004. I was actually back in tech school at that time as a full-time student. And I could have heard about it on campus. I don't remember, but I do remember the first time I saw it, which I think is a little bit different than when you saw it, because, as I mentioned, I was a student, and we had 2 children at the time, and my wife was a teacher. So when you have a teacher's salary coming in and a student and 2 children, and you're living in a rental, there's not a lot of extra to go around. Mm-hmm. And so when I heard about this, I was like, well, I got to have to find this movie and watch it. And so I found a pirated copy of this movie, and I watched it on my laptop
Really?
and freaked the shit out of me. Man, I still remember sitting on the, and this is no lie. I mean, whatever, you can talk about welfare people or whatever. I was sitting on the couch, as I said, because we had barely any money, watching a pirated copy of this movie, and I was drinking like some shitty like hobo wine at the time, and just like, what? When the guy got up at the end of the movie, you're like, what? He was in the room the whole time? Son of a... Because when I first watched it, it was all grainy and stuff, and then a couple of... I don't remember when it was, like a year later or whatever, when it was like finally on cable, and I saw like the original version of it, and I was like, oh, well, that's pretty much the same version I saw a year ago.
So you didn't see it in the theater?
I did not see it in the theater.
Really? Yeah. So for me, it was because it came out like on I think the week of Halloween. I remember this very well because that week, that specific week, my wife, we were offered to go to Florida there was her grandparents have a timeshare, and we were going to go out there. And I had been just at the time really, really stressed out because of work, and I just like the idea of driving to Florida, and that's how they got there, was just way too, like, I just couldn't even fathom the idea of trying to do that. So she ended up taking a friend with, and she took our kids. And for the first time in I don't know how long, I had the house to myself for a week because I took my vacation week that week. And it was the week that Saw came out. And so it was like kind of, I just needed time to just be alone and recharge. And like recently, I had, like I said, I heard about it on the radio. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go watch this film. I was completely blown away. I mean, just like you said, the ending and the idea of the guy was always there. Just had no idea that was like, totally not expected. It probably kind of the same feel that I had with this film is what I had with The Sixth Sense, with the ending, the big reveal at the end of that. This one was like the first time I was ever like kind of, that was like one-upped or whatever. And I was like, holy crap. And I just couldn't believe it. And I remember just thinking, that was the most disturbing, scary movie I've seen in the longest time. And, finally, because we were just finally out of the 90s, and like you and I always complain about 90s horror, it was just terrible. Wes Craven, of course, he gave us Freddy Krueger, and you can't say anything about him for that. I mean, he's great. He's an awesome director. I just personally was never a big fan of the Scream series. Was not a fan of, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and any of that like WB, teenage heartthrob movies. I just like never did it for me. So finally in 2004, we get a movie that's like, oh, this is great. This is like, for the first time, we get a horror movie that's like original. It's a whole new concept. And to this day, I think about it, and it's like, I still think like the original Saw is kind of like, you could probably put it in the category of like our slasher films or whatever. Like, the 80s 70s and 80s were slashers, and then back in the early 2000s, it was like this kind of disturbing torture porn type thing. And we did Hostel recently, but this one in Hostel, those were like kind of took horror to a whole new level. But yeah, this movie really blew me away.
The other thing with the Saw franchise that goes back to with what you were just talking about with all the other slasher movies is, I think that the Saw franchise is really the only one that has had so many successful sequels, because what did they have, 7 or 8 sequels that came out of this? And
well, yeah, there's a new one now that like was released last year, and now is on Amazon and all that.
Yeah, and that's got to be, I think the only other recent movie that has had that much success, which probably didn't even span that many movies, was the Paranormal Activity movies.
Yeah, that one became kind of like they kind of went mano a mano with each other, because I remember like every year around October there was a new Saw movie for the longest time, and then all of a sudden they turned it was Paranormal Activity kind of took over, and that became the thing to look for.
Right. But yeah, this one was so original, and it was just one of those things where when it got to the end, you were like, oh, that's amazing. And even the first few sequels of this movie, I think, at least in my opinion, were kind of that way too. Like, oh, okay, cool. That's a cool take on the story, or that. Okay, so that happened. That's cool. As it got a little bit further into the franchise, same thing happened with all the other ones. Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff, where you're like, oh, okay. So, yep, Jigsaw. Yep, we got it. Oh, yeah, okay. So, yeah, that's a lot of blood. Great.
Right.
I just remember being so blown away with this movie when it came out. When you actually sit back and watch it now, just how simple it is, and anybody could make this movie with the amount of, you just need a room with some shitty lighting in it and a couple of actors, and you're done. You could make this movie for $100.
There really isn't a whole lot there. It's like you got the guys that sitting in that like the shithole basement or wherever they are, and then you've got the scenes in the warehouse and the factory, the abandoned factory. There really isn't. Yeah, they could clearly make this one for low budget. What I thought with this film, horror never really got we look back at okay, so the imagery from let's go back to, let's say, Psycho. You've got the house, you've got Norman Bates and the knife and the mother in the fruit cellar, her corpse, all that. You've got these really strong images that kind of get ingrained in your brain. Then you move on to the 70s, and then you've got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you've got Leatherface, you've got the old farmhouse, the chainsaw, all these different things, the skin mask, The Exorcist, the Linda Blair's character. You've got Halloween, these images, the pumpkin, the Shatner mask, the butcher knife, and there just seemed like in the Friday the 13th you got the hockey mask, and it just didn't seem like there really was much that they didn't really have these. Seemed like horror had become so watered down in the 90s that there wasn't anything that really held up as really terrifying imagery. And then when this movie came out, you had the Billy puppet, which I thought was just a stroke of genius. That was just amazing, I thought. And then you had the pig head mask that the killer wore, and things like that just stick in your head and kind of oh yeah, I remember that puppet. That puppet was terrifying. And I remember just leaving the theater and thinking, wow, that was really cool. That was probably the best horror film I've seen since I was in high school.
The only movie that came out anywhere close to that time frame that would have been almost close to the same level would have been the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which came out whatever that was, a year before that or 2 years before that, which I did see in the theater, and I think we talked about that on a different episode. But
yep, we did.
Just the whole thing is just insane with this movie. You come to think that, it's, which probably is kind of in line with even some of the newer horror that we see nowadays. This ultra low budget horror movie, virtually no special effects in it at all. There's really no gore, even when you think about it. You jump to the end of the movie where, one of the characters finally saws his foot off. You don't see anything.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Yeah, because there really isn't. It's more, you've got some blood splatters. I think of when the Danny Glover's partner, hits the booby trap and he gets shotgun blast to his head.
Oh yeah.
You just basically see blood splatter on his body, and you don't really see the after effects or whatever. But when I think of this film, I always think it was probably in my mind, it's like, wow, that was one of the goriest films I ever seen. But when you look back, you're like, yeah, well, it probably wasn't as gory as I remembered, which I think is a good sign that it was effective, because it, like, your mind kind of made up for the stuff that you didn't see.
And even like that scene you're talking about, the shotgun to the head scene, when they loop back around and they show the body on the ground, you still don't ever really see the gore at all.
No, not really. You're right.
And the other smart thing that I think that they did with this movie, which probably wasn't on purpose, but it was getting the couple of larger name actors to play some of the characters that they played. So you're the Cary Ellis character from he was in The Princess Bride, and then Danny Glover was the detective. So I think that in itself, you have a little bit of name recognition. So people are like, I love that guy in The Princess Bride. I'm totally going to go see that movie. Oh, what the hell is that?
Right.
And same thing with Danny Glover. You're like, Danny Glover, I love that guy in Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, he did a great job in this film. I thought he was really well cast.
But I think this movie, and I wish I remembered any advertisements for this movie, because I don't. And I don't know if there ever was any, like, on TV or anything, if it was ever portrayed as a horror movie. Because this is one of those... I
don't remember.
Yeah, this is one of those ones that I think you could probably get away with portraying it as a suspense movie. Because up until... there's a few scenes, when they're kind of done doing some of the, like, how did you get here? Oh, wait, I remember now how I got here. Like you were talking about the big face mask and stuff like that. Up until, like, that kind of stuff, like, there's really no true horror elements to it. The other thing that this movie was up against was the movie Hostel, which is where we came up with the idea for this episode, was after we talked about Hostel, which is another one of those movies where it doesn't necessarily have any true horror elements to it, but it has, a lot of suspense and a lot of... But at the same time, there's a lot of gore.
Hostel came afterwards, right?
I think they came out pretty much right around the same time.
Okay, yeah, this kind of turned the corner to horror. Like, that we had the slashers in the 80s, and I don't know what you'd say, the 90s, like kind of like the self-aware horror movies like Scream, and where it just was like everybody was like, well, we know what horror movies are, so we're just gonna, like, make a movie where it's basically like everybody's, like, talking about all the tropes and everything in a film. And so I think, like, this one just kind of took it, and finally we got something, like, was a little bit different. And this was like I said earlier, like, sort of the torture porn. Is this one really torture porn, like, especially compared to Hostel? Not quite the same level, I guess, like we've said, but it sort of falls into that category. And I know that was a big deal back then when it first came out, and there was some controversy about that. But this film was, really effective for, when you look back and you think, like, yeah, it kind of changed the landscape of what was out at the time. We haven't talked about it too much, but, like, Silence of the Lambs was one of those films that to me was, I don't know how you feel about it, but I always thought that was an incredibly effective thriller. And this one was sort of, like, finally, like, something that at the time, like, I hadn't seen anything quite as effective as that. This one sort of came out and sort of was like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is kind of along the lines of that, where you kind of don't know what's happening. Don't know what to expect. And one thing, too, I must admit, like, I haven't seen all of the sequels to it. I've seen bits and pieces of most of them. I haven't seen the new one. I did see the second one in the theater. I was really excited because the second one came out the following year, and I was like totally like, oh, great, Saw 2. And I remember being pretty disappointed in it. Like, I wasn't happy. It just didn't have the same effect as the original did for me.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I didn't see this one in the theater. I saw all of the sequels up until the most recent one in the theater.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. I always think of this movie on the same plane as The Sixth Sense.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because this is one of those movies, the first time you watch it, you're just like, whoa, that's amazing. And then when you watch it again, well, I will actually put this one a little bit higher than The Sixth Sense, because when you watch The Sixth Sense a second time, you're like, yeah, he knows he's dead. Great, whatever. Who cares? But this one, there's still some suspense to it, and there's still kind of, like, oh, watch out. Oh, damn, you just blew your head off. But it's still kind of that same, it kind of loses a little bit of that, like, whoa factor when you watch it again. I think this movie was born from kind of that thought process that we were at in that time period, the mid 2000s. So everybody was like, oh, we have to have some sort of, you have to have a cool twist, or you have to have something in the movie that everybody's going to be like, oh, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. But, for a horror movie, I think this one was one of those ones where you're just like, whoa, that was really great. And all of the movies up until, like I said, up until the most recent one I saw in the movie theater, and for the most part, they still kind of had, at least for me anyway, I mean, some of them you're kind of like, that wasn't as good as the last one, but they still were, for the most part, like, that was all right. That was pretty good. I'm glad I saw that in the movie theater with a big bucket of popcorn and my giant Coke. Sure.
It was like the first time like you got like a franchise back and really going, other than I guess like Scream. But I mean, this one, this is about as close to like a modern day, I guess, in terms of 10 years ago or whatever. Like a Friday the 13th, like, we had in the 80s, we had a Friday the 13th film every year, and now finally, like, there was something that really kind of went along with that. Like, it was like this new genre, this new type of film, kind of, and they kept the franchise going for, every year you pretty much expected one. And then Paranormal Activity, like we said, kind of took over. So these were like the new horror films. So like the kids that grew up, when these were being pumped out, will remember these as like, oh yeah, the Saw franchise. Oh yeah, that was like that was a big deal. That'll be kind of like their version of Jason. And I wonder, like, we've always talked about how, like, the Frankenstein, Dracula, and all the classic horror monsters, the Wolfman. You go to the Halloween store or the your pharmacy, and you see all the Halloween decorations for those things. And then nowadays it's like Michael Myers, Jason, or Freddy. You can like get cutouts to put on in your window. Or we're gonna have Billy the puppet, like if he's gonna be like a Halloween decoration, and or like whatever the character is from Paranormal Activity, if there is anything that would like some sort of imagery or whatever. But I wonder if those will be the next mainstream, everybody knows what they are type of imagery.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious as that myself.
Yeah. Be kind of interesting.
Well, I would say it's pretty obvious that the two of us give this one a giant thumbs up.
Yeah, you can't really go wrong with Saw. You gotta give it a thumbs up because it really brought horror back. I think and you got to think too at this time, like you said with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it was really this is the beginning of the remake phase. Because when I think of the early 2000s, it was really just like the movies I was excited about were all the remakes that were coming out. And, My Bloody Valentine, Friday the 13th, Halloween, all of those. And so this was like its own original thing at that time. So you got to give it props for that. That's pretty cool.